All right. So I've been playing my fair share of Animal Crossing. I'm not at the end game yet. I'm not at the final Tom Nook boss battle, but I've been around the island a few times, and for some reason, like most of you I'm sure, I've been compelled to do a whole bunch of monotonous stuff like pick weeds, mine rocks, mash through menus. Remind me again why this game's fun? During one of my Tarantula Island runs, I thought to myself, there's gotta be an easier way. And there is. The controller you're using could lend you an extra hand to make your island life just a little bit easier. There's two things that we're going to be looking into today, and that's turbo and macros. A lot of different controllers that we've talked about here on this channel have a turbo function, but not very many have a macro function. Turbo is something that I saw in a lot of third-party controllers growing up, specifically on retro consoles. You can either see it as a switch or as a button. When you hold a button down on a normal controller, that just holds the button down. And in a game like Animal Crossing, that will just register as one press, one really long press. If you enable turbo, the controller will mimic you rapidly pressing that button just by you holding it down. Imagine you're playing Mega Man, and instead of using the charge shot, you'd rather rapidly shoot. That's where turbo would come in. As you can imagine, this can be pretty useful for 2D fighting games. You could just spam punches to your heart's content. Lately, I've seen a strange uptick in messages asking about controllers with a turbo function, so I figured I'd look into it. And all of these people were asking because of Animal Crossing. Except for MDB, he wanted it for his Pokemon challenge, but he's always got to be the outlier. Whenever I reviewed a controller in the past, I always kind of just ignored the turbo function because it didn't really serve a purpose for me. But now I have a purpose, and it has been very useful. My current favorite controller for the Nintendo Switch is the 8BitDo SN30 Pro Plus, and I've talked about it a lot on this channel, so if you've seen any videos on here before, you've probably heard me talk about this. It has a turbo function, which you've probably never heard me talk about because I've never used it before. But it doesn't have a turbo button by default on the Nintendo Switch mode, which is the most important mode. This star button acts as a turbo button on Windows and Mac, but on Switch, it acts as the capture button. Of all of the buttons here, I think we can all agree that that is probably the most useless one. So you're gonna have to plug this controller into a computer, download the 8BitDo Ultimate software, and change that capture button to a turbo button. Then click sync, and next time you connect this to your Switch, you'll be all set. Now, I usually don't like to recommend products if you have to do a little bit of homework, like plugging it into a computer. But even after all of that, I still recommend this over any of the other controllers with a turbo function just because of how good of a controller this is in every other scenario. Once you set this turbo button, you'll be set for life. You'll never have to plug it in again. It'll remember that setting every time you turn it on and off. The turbo button on this controller allows you to set the turbo for individual buttons, which is very important. You just hold down the turbo button and the button you want turboed at the same time. You'll know it works if the light around the home button flashes when you press that button. You can unset the turbo by repeating the process. So you can pretty much do this on the fly in the middle of a game. For Animal Crossing, I recommend turboing the Y and A buttons, and that's it. Y is super useful for picking stuff up off the ground, and A is useful for using tools like mining rocks or hitting trees with an axe. These settings will reset every time you turn off your controller or your controller goes to sleep. But the star button will remain your turbo button because that's now baked into the firmware thanks to the software that you use. So the buttons you assign the turbo to will be wiped every time, which is probably for the better because it's super annoying when you forget that a button has turbo on. You can accidentally mash through some menus in the Switch home screen or something. To mash through dialogue, hold R and A. R will make the text scroll faster and A will mash to the next line. Holding B with the turbo would work too, but It will also make you more likely to say no when a surprise question comes up. And then you're going to accidentally let Blathers not tell you everything there is to know about wasps. And then he's going to be all sad. You don't want to do that to him, right? Little Blathers. He's all excited about telling you all everything he knows. But really, you shouldn't turbo the B button because it just makes running weird. It actually makes you run slower if you have the turbo button on. It like stutters a little bit. Turbo is also great for wishing on stars. You can literally just stare at the sky and hold A. Every time a star comes by, you're guaranteed to get it. You could just put a rubber band around the controller and leave it there all night if you really wanted that many stars. Turbo is also useful for crafting the same item over and over. If you craft an item once, hitting Keep Crafting will bring you back to the crafting menu with the same item still highlighted. Also, mashing through the crafting animation will make it go faster, so just holding A with turbo enabled will also make it go faster. It also makes it way easier to spam the ocarina. The other way to make Animal Crossing way easier is with macros. Now, this is a little more complicated. The 8BitDo SN30 Pro does have a macro function, but it kind of sucks. It's more for fighting games. You have to input the macro on the computer and then save it to the controller, and it plays that macro way too fast. It doesn't really give you any control over the speed. Also, you can't program any macros with the thumbstick, so that's useless for our purposes here. The only controller that I know that has a macro function that we can use for this purpose is the Gully Kit King Kong Pro Controller. Now, I feel like I need to preface this by saying that this is not a very good controller. You should only really get this controller for its macro function. Don't expect to want to play every other game with this controller. You're probably better off just with the Joy-Con grip for a lot of things. I have a whole video on this, so go watch that if you want more info on this controller specifically. But after using it a lot more for this video, I realized that it has some weird connectivity issues, and I think it's tied to its battery life. Like if it's not at a full 100% charge, it will just feel like it has interference or something. I don't know what the cause is. All I know is if I was playing a game that required reaction time, I would have been very angry. But luckily, we're playing Animal Crossing. It's a little more lenient. The way the macro function works is you hold down that macro button. Once the controller stops vibrating, you input what you want to record. For example, you can record all of the inputs for mining a rock and picking up all the loot afterwards. Once you are done recording, you just press that macro button again, and it'll stop recording. Now, every time you press this macro button, it will play out what you recorded. In my testing in other games, it seemed like the timing of what the macro records isn't very accurate, but luckily, timing doesn't really matter all too much in Animal Crossing. It might take 2 or 3 tries to get the macro just right, but eventually, you'll be able to mine your rocks perfectly every time with just the press of a button. I also use this to chop down trees. If the macro messes up, or you just want to cancel it to pick up the loot yourself, you can just press any face button and the controller will cancel the macro. Oh no, oh no, oh no. You bitch. Take that, you bitch. I highly recommend going into the Switch's settings and turning off the vibrate function when you're using this controller, because once you play a macro, and if you feel like setting the controller down on the table, it will get very loud and obnoxious. The vibrate function on this controller is very harsh. These macros were especially useful when trying to create my own little spider island. Taking down trees with just the push of one button was the ultimate laziness, but super useful. Honestly, using turbo to pick up all of the stuff lying on the ground might be the most useful function when you're trying to make a spider island. Luckily, this Gully Kit controller also has a turbo function, and it works the same as the 8BitDo controller. Just hold the cogwheel button and press the button you want turboed. However, on the Gully Kit controller, it's easier to forget what buttons are turboed and what aren't because there's no indicator light telling you anything. I realize I never explained this in the video, but a spider island is when you go to a random Nook Miles island and you remove everything. You get rid of all of the plants, you get rid of all of the trees, you get rid of all the rocks, so that only tarantulas will spawn, or now water bugs too. After you're done mining your resources, you can also set a macro to sell everything in your inventory with just the push of one button. This is also dangerous though, so make sure you clear your inventory of things you don't want to sell. Or just set the macro for a single line of items. Now you can stockpile tarantulas, wait for Flick to come by, and record a macro of you selling your whole inventory of spiders and replay it over and over again. I have no footage of this because I have still never seen Flick at all, ever on my island. He's avoiding me. And he's a Knuckles Chaotix character, right? These macros might not save you time, but they will definitely save you some sanity, because right now, you're probably redoing the same monotonous tasks over and over and over again. And that's just gonna drive anybody crazy. Again, why do we like this game? Between these two controllers, the Gully Kit controller seems like it's more useful because it has the turbo and macro functions. However, I would still recommend the 8-Bit Do controller over the Gully Kit because it's just an overall better controller, and you can use it for way more games than just Animal Crossing. It can be a pro controller replacement. The Gully Kit should only really be used for its macro function. It's not a very reliable controller otherwise. If you only ever intend to play Animal Crossing with this thing, then sure, why not go ahead and get the Gully Kit controller. It's only $40 on Amazon right now, which isn't bad. Actually, that $40 one, that's not the pro version, but it still has macros. I don't know what makes this one different. Honestly, having a turbo function that you can apply to just the Y and A buttons is already enough to make your Animal Crossing experience way easier. The macros are just the ultimate laziness. And the best part is, it's not cheating because it takes the same amount of time. And you're still putting the inputs in. You just did it in the past. So technically this is time travel also. So it's just the opposite time travel that everybody else has been doing. But it's not that type of time travel is cheating. This one's not cheating though, because it's still you do, and it takes the same amount of time. But the other one doesn't also take. Anyway, what do you guys think about using turbo and macros in Animal Crossing? Do you have any ideas that you can use macros for? Because I'm sure I didn't cover everything here. This is just what I could think of. I'm just a lonely one person. A lot of the footage that I used here was from a Twitch stream, and I archive all of my streams over on youtube.com/wolfdenvods. I'll leave a link here, and you can watch this whole stream of me playing with these controllers. It's like 6 hours of content. So yeah, leave me your ideas in the comments below, at me on Twitter, or any and all this other social media garbage, or go to twitch.tv/wolfden. And if I'm live, you can just tell me right there. Of course, we got new videos and live streams all the time here. Schedule's usually in a pinned tweet over on Twitter. And we got Wolfden Live every single Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern time here on YouTube. That's another way you can talk to us. It's our little live podcast. But of course, the most important thing and the easiest thing that you could do to help support us is just subscribe. That way you know when there's new videos and stuff. And share this video with a friend. A friend who loves Animal Crossing so much and is trying all these other stupid ways to make a lot of bells. They'll probably be interested in something like this. Thank you guys very much. Have yourself a very good day.